Hello, everyone. Welcome to another day of talking about all of the things. Today I'm hoping Joe Nice will join me again. We're going to talk about intersectionality, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think Joe has also been thinking about a lot. So, yeah, hopefully Joe will be able to join. Okay, well, I don't see him on, so I guess I will just sort of, introduce myself. I wanted to start today with, just grounding where I'm coming from, in the sense that we all have, like, intersecting identities within our lives that are important to discuss and explore. And here comes. Hello.
Catherine, hello. Hello.
How are you doing?
You know what? It's been a long day. I've been talking all day. It's just been me having conversations left, right, up, and down, and it's been a lot. And I'm trying to make sure I get a good, I'm now kind of centered in here because, again, I'm not used to being on bottom, but it is what it is. But everything's cool. The workouts are great.
Good.
You're
staying hydrated?
Of course.
Good.
I've got the,
yeah.
Yeah. What about you? Everything's okay?
Yeah, things are just living, working, doing the things.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. Looking forward to today's chat because, intersectionality is a big deal.
Yeah.
Intersectionality is a big deal. And I hope that everybody that's watching right now, and I'm sure we'll have more people watching, will understand that, hey, looky here, white lady from Chicago and black guy from Baltimore, this is sort of what intersectionality looks like.
From Canada, not Chicago, but yeah.
No, I said Canada.
You said Chicago, but that's okay.
I did I just, oh, Jesus. You know what? I honestly thought I said Canada, but if I said Chicago, I apologize. Obviously, you're not from Chicago. My gosh, whoops.
Yeah, no, it's all good. That's actually how I wanted to start today's discussion, actually, is just kind of ground ourselves in where we're coming from and who we are, and talk about sort of the intersections of our identity that we're bringing to this discussion.
Right. Well,
yeah.
By all means, ladies first. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that first and foremost, I need to just say that I'm coming from a place of privileged, like, education. Both of us have been to university and gone on to grad school, so I think that there is an aspect of this discussion and all of our chats that is grounded in that understanding and the stuff we learned there. I mean, it's not the same as everyone else learns, but yeah, I think that that's an important thing. Race is a big one. That's what people see when they see you. Gender's next up.
Of course it is.
So, especially as both of us present gender-wise as our cisgendered selves.
Right.
I think that's an important one to discuss. And then the other ones, I mean, we can go on and on and on. As people are seen as different aspects of society. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. We can discuss all of that and more.
Of course. And I know we've got about, less than 60 minutes to do it all, but, there's obviously this whole understanding of intersectionality, and Catherine, you said it perfectly. I mean, we both come from, I guess, somewhat privileged educational backgrounds. We've both been to graduate school. I've been to graduate school now twice. So there's a bit of a difference in all of this, but in addition to sort of that academic sort of side of, I think, yourself and obviously with me, there's this sort of whole life experience that comes into play. And it's all the stuff that I've learned that's a textbook or a teacher or a professor could never teach me. That I know if that teacher could never give me a test that would truly assess my level of life knowledge, because they would never be able to ask the questions that I would be required to answer. So there's that whole aspect of it that's going to be incredibly important in this discussion of intersectionality, because regardless of how many books you read or how many YouTube videos you watch or how many memes you see on Instagram or how many lengthy Facebook posts or tweets that you read, there's no substitute for experience. There's no substitute for the lived experience. There's no substitute for for in the literal and figurative sense, it's being punched in the face and then figuring out and getting knocked down and having to get up on your own. There's no substitute for that. So, and again, when we start talking about intersectionality, it's an understanding that everybody's oppression is some way connected in some form or fashion. It's that sort of understanding. Now it goes across obviously social identities and political identities, race, gender, class, so sexual orientation, nationality, disability, religion, and where you have this sort of affinity or common connectedness between one social and political or religious identity and another social or religious or political identity, you begin to understand not only your struggle a bit easier and more deeply, but you understand that other person's struggle and fight deeply, because you can see what they're dealing with, and it also creates these overlapping dependencies of and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage and everything that is horrible that's happening in the world right now. So it's not easy as just saying, well, hey, look, I'm black and I'm fighting against racism. Well, you could have an LGBTQ person and saying, well, hey, I'm queer and I'm fighting for gay rights. Well, there's an obvious intersectionality within that is the obvious forms of discrimination that come from being black and being treated as a second-class citizen in the United States and being an LGBTQ person and understanding that, hey, I'm being discriminated because of my gender or sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. So obviously we can dive a whole lot deeper into that, but the whole understanding of intersectionality, the term was actually created by a professor named Kimberly Crenshaw. And she's actually a law professor at Columbia, and she's also teaching law at UCLA. And she created this term in 1989 in a paper that she did. And it wasn't added until the Oxford Dictionary, I think until 2005, if I'm not mistaken, because so many people started to use the word intersectionality strictly with regards to the LGBTQ movement. But then the definition expanded as other people saw their own injustices and common connections with other people who suffered injustices.
Yeah, for sure. That's totally what I was also gonna bring up too. Like the actual definition was popularized through sort of like the second wave feminist stuff in the 90s. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's really important, and it is in the dictionary now, which is also like a big win for those.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
For those folks. So I guess, do you want to just dive right in? We were gonna talk about the recent current events where the Supreme Court ruled that there was a federal law passed basically forbidding workplace discrimination for gay and trans folks.
Correct.
And so this is like coming at a time that is, loads of things are already happening. This was only a few days after Trump removed the anti-discrimination protections for trans people in healthcare.
Correct.
And so these things, I just want to talk about how all of these little things that are coming up, sorry, I shouldn't say that, all of these big things that are coming up are all part of the same movement, and they should be encompassed in that, even though I don't want to take away from the message of Black Lives Matter, because that's super important.
Agreed.
So,
agreed.
Yeah.
Well, go for it. You go first. It's your show. I'm co-pilot.
I mean, that's my main point is how do we work at this dismantling of oppression, because it's such a huge thing, and everything's so interconnected and, you know, intersectional
Of
that
course.
that it seems a bit overwhelming or daunting, because I think that really what we have right now is an opportunity for revolution. And
I agree.
yeah, and I think that that's how we should formulate the rhetoric around this, because even though the Black Lives Matter movement is, you know, at the forefront of our minds right now, and it should be,
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
we need to be able to pull all of these other aspects into marginalization and, like, you know, work at dismantling. So
Correct.
yeah.
Correct. And I think, and Catherine, you bring up an excellent point because, again, you said, hey, the Supreme Court had this ruling. Supreme Court had this ruling. And the other thing you said previously was, hey, Donald Trump removed a provision that was part of the Affordable Care Act that that left transgender people vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice what the roots of those two changes came from, they came from legislation. They came from policy. And for weeks, for months now, I've been saying, look, it's all well and good that people, the Black Lives Matter movement is saying, hey, no justice, no peace. Black Lives Matter. But eventually, these fights, the four fights that we've consistently talked about, humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, they're going to have to manifest themselves in some type of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I've been at several protests over the past 3 weeks, and again, I'm the only person out there with a sign with actual policy points that are going to move this country forward. And ultimately, even though you're in a different country than me, some of the problems that you all are going to suffer from in terms of EI insurance, EI running out, or the $2,000 a month, supposedly Trudeau is not going to be renewing that for the unemployed. So again, universal basic income. I've talked about it. You've talked about it. And again, it's a common struggle. That struggle for a universal basic income, and that struggle of a universal basic income. Yes, it does race. Yeah, black, white. There are plenty of white people that are out of work. I'm out of work now because I can't play any shows anywhere. But again, there's plenty of women that are out of jobs. There are plenty of men that are out of jobs. It doesn't matter if you've made $100,000 a year, if you're making $10,000 a year. You need to have some sort of income. So there again, there is that intersectionality, strictly on just one specific policy point of universal basic income. This again, I think so much of this has to be, it's a two-handed fight. Again, there's the social justice part of it, where people are in the streets, people are marching up and down saying, you know what, yeah, Black Lives Matter, Black trans lives matter, LGBTQIA lives matter, Latinx lives matter, Jewish lives matter. You know what? Everybody's lives matter because we all deserve to have human rights. But there's going to have to be that other legislative, socioeconomic fight that
Mm-hmm.
has to happen. And I think that's going to happen through the legislative process. Because again, none of this is going to make up, none of this, all of this marching up and down is going to be worth a cup of coffee if 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, there's still 25% unemployment in the United States, and there's still 50 or 60 or 70 million people without health care, and COVID-19, instead of taking 120,000 lives, takes 2.5 million lives or more.
No, that's such a good point, and I think that that's part of why. I mean, you've said it before, and I've said it before. Like, I think the wording around this needs to transition into from social movement to like a revolution, because a revolution means that we're going to change the governance of this place, and
Correct.
this one's big enough. I think we need to do it all around the world.
I agree.
So, and that's another thing that you just made me think of is I talk a lot about dismantling and taking apart this systemic oppression. But what do we
Yes.
do to build it back up? And that's the policy piece. We need
Mm-hmm.
systems that take care of the most vulnerable people in our society so
I agree.
that we don't have to have these issues coming up every few years, in the news cycle. Like, this doesn't go away. Just because
Doesn't.
it's in your news right now doesn't mean it's going to go away unless we get real policy change, like you said. So yeah, that was a
Exactly.
really good point. Yeah.
Exactly. And the first on my news sign, everybody saw the picture of me standing in front of Baltimore City Hall by myself the other day, and and I guess and it's cool, and people I guess saw some sort of message behind it, and I guess I'm thankful for that. But I had to remix the sign because I said, you know what, the first item of the sign was reparations for Black people, but you know what? Yeah, we do need Black people do need reparations because white people in the United States have had a 350 to 400 year head start on building wealth, and that's pretty tough to catch up on when somebody's got a 400-year head start. But then I thought about it. I was like, you know what? Right here in my hands is a copy of the United States Constitution.
Nice.
Okay? And there are 27 amendments to this Constitution. Black people in the United States, and again, this was ratified on March 4th, 1789. Black people in the United States didn't get anything until the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment said, hey, look, black folks, you all don't have to pick cotton, you don't have to pick fruit and vegetables, and you don't have to do laundry for white people because you all are no longer slaves. Yippee. Then the
Unless you go
next
to
time,
prison.
correct. And there you go. And then the 14th Amendment says, hey, equal protection under the law. But then the laws were written to subjugate black people, such as vagrancy laws. So from 1865 to 1868, which is when the 14th Amendment happened, it was just, okay, well, yeah, y'all black folks kind of just hang out, and hope you survive and hope you all don't get arrested, because if you commit a crime, you're going back to jail. And then jails were essentially indentured servitudes, prison labor camps. Black people didn't get anything again until 2 years later in 1870 when, hey, we got the right to vote. So, and let's not forget that this Constitution was written by a bunch of white guys, older white guys for the most part, and the majority, if not all of them, owned slaves. And again, the United States is a representative government. So we, in our political process, we go ahead and say, hey, look, you representative, you represent this group of people in Washington to make sure that you have our best interest in mind. That is what a representative government is. Now, again, the United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I don't understand how we can have a supreme law of the land that does not truly represent the people that we have in the United States now. We update our software on our phones. We update our software on our computers. For God's sake, why don't we update the software that is the basis of our legal and judicial system? Let's update this software. Let's update the Constitution. But you know what? We're not going to update it by coming up with whiteout and just whiting out sections of it. And yes, this is really whiteout. It says liquid paper here. This is really whiteout. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is just tear this up. We're going to get in Google Docs, and we're going to write some new laws. We're going to write a new supreme law of the land. Because again, if we go ahead and push for all of these policies that I keep talking about, all of these policies like reparations for black people, and getting rid of money in politics, and legalizing cannabis across the United States, and obviously across Canada, but it's already legalized in Canada.
Yeah.
And a universal basic income, and postal banking, and public banking, and abolishing ICE, and a Green New Deal, and criminal justice reform, and ending qualified immunity for police officers, and ending the surveillance state, and enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. I assume you understand. You know what the Sherman Antitrust Act is?
I feel like if you told me I would, but not right now.
Okay. All right. The Sherman Antitrust Act essentially prevents monopolies from being created in the United States.
Totally.
And certainly, I would think that Facebook is a monopoly. I would certainly think Google is a monopoly. I would absolutely think that Walmart and Target, maybe Walmart is a monopoly, and obviously Amazon. Mm-hmm. Obviously. So again, enforcing Sherman antitrust would allow for more competitive business entities. I would like to see the abolishment of corporate news. I would like to see basically getting rid of the Communications Act that Bill Clinton signed in 1996. That way we can have more independent media as part of the media diaspora as a whole. Community policing, criminal justice reform. I mean, these are the things, these are eliminating food deserts. Again, policy. We have to go to policy. And if we go ahead and implement policy with this as our foundation, what we've done is essentially built a house of cards we built a house of cards on quicksand.
Yeah.
It's on quicksand. And anything that we put on that quicksand and that house of cards, it's going to collapse, sink, and fail. And none of the legislation that we actually need policy-wise to move our country forward will have any sort of teeth and any sort of effect at all.
Yeah. It's the same in Canada. My goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to abolish everything and start back with all of the people that actually live in these countries in mind, and include them in the process. And yeah, there's going to be disagreements, but like things like treating people with, you know, a universal basic income, that should be a bare minimum. Your basic needs need to be met, point blank. We do not live in a world where, you know, exploitation should be the norm anymore. We need to take care of each other, and by doing that, we need a government body that will, you know, disseminate the wealth. We need wealth redistribution.
I agree. And again, what's interesting, and I just happen to have this copy of the Constitution where I am because I'm lucky, I suppose. But in the Canadian Constitution, I've actually read bits and pieces of it when I visited the Canadian Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg in August of 2017. I had a chance to walk around the building. It's a fascinating building. It's absolutely excellent. And the Canadian Constitution actually discusses human rights. Human rights is part of the Canadian Constitution. There is nothing in this Constitution that explicitly says the words human rights. In fact, the words civil rights aren't actually mentioned in this Constitution because the Civil Rights Act happened in 1964 under Lyndon Baines Johnson. So again, the supreme law of the land does not mention the words human rights, nor does this Constitution explicitly say the words civil rights. So again, if we're not even talking human rights, then why are we dealing with anything that policy-wise that this is based on? And again, the preamble to the Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility." There's nothing domestic about our tranquility right now. I mean, we have riot police shooting other people, shooting Americans. That doesn't look like domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Well, okay, we do a really good job of that because our military budget is out of control, and we spend more on that than just about, with the exception of healthcare. Our biggest expense is the military budget. Promote the general welfare. And again, that's right here in black and white. Promote the general welfare? Really? That's what we're doing? Then how come there are so many people who haven't been able to receive unemployment? How come there are so many people there are 60 or 70 million people without health care? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't look like general welfare to me at all. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Blessings of liberty? Really? Look how unequal the criminal justice system is. If you were to deal drugs, Catherine, and you know, on the mean streets of Toronto, you might get a slap on the wrist. Catherine Wells, don't do that again. If I deal drugs on the mean streets of Baltimore, I'm not getting out until I'm 65 years old. That doesn't look like the blessings of liberty. That doesn't look like freedom. That doesn't, no. And to establish this Constitution of the United States of America, this is toilet paper. This is tissues. This is the stuff that you put on the bottom of a bird cage.
Yeah.
It's shit. It's terrible, and it needs to be rewritten all the way across.
No, I totally agree with you. And it sounds to some radical, but it's not. This is just, it's
common sense.
Yeah, it's common sense. We want to take care of other human beings. Like, what's so complicated with that? Like,
why is racism a debate?
Yeah.
Why is making sure that everybody having health care, cretin out here disagrees with that. You know how much of an asshole you have to be to say, you know what, I don't want everybody to have health care because, you know what, I actually like having some sick people in our society. I want people to die from not being able to have the appropriate health care. And, you know, if you can afford health care, I want you to make sure that you're a slave to debt for the rest of your lives because, you know what, yeah, I want to make sure that everybody can't afford health care also. Seriously?
Yeah, it's messed. And I think, like, a lot of the rhetoric I hear from folks that might not necessarily agree with all of this is like all about the economy, and
Of course.
I just don't get it. I can't. If someone's suffering, like, why would you care about economic gains? I don't get it.
Look at what happened in the United States. The first thing the United States did when this pandemic came out was, hey, you know what? We're in a pandemic. Okay, instead of making sure that everybody has health care and instead of making sure everybody has universal basic income for as long as this pandemic took place, what did Congress do? Congress said, hey, let's cut interest rates. And that goes exactly to what you said, Catherine. Hey, instead of taking care of people, we're more worried about making sure that big businesses and banks and corporate state gets taken care of first. And that is fuckery. That is fuckery on the highest level. It's fuckery on the highest level. And this goes back to our entire topic of intersectionality, because again, in our first conversation that everybody jumped on and said, wow, this is really interesting. I continually mentioned the four fights, and for some inexplicable reason, the topic of that analogy of the Titanic, when I said, hey, you know what, black people are the band in the bottom of that boat, and the water's filling up, the trumpet player's got water in his horn, the drummer's splashing around, but you know, there's that sort of intersectionality among various groups of people that where America is that boat that's sinking, and the boat just ran into the Titanic, and the Titanic and that iceberg is COVID-19. And again, this sort of intersectionality is exactly why in this entire revolution that we're experiencing right now, why there's so many white people that have joined on, because white people are seeing the intersectionality of black struggle for the past 400 years. And I said it in the first video we did. White people have had to deal with this for a season. Black people have had to deal with this for centuries. And now white people are looking at this saying, shit, yeah, I don't like having a job. Yeah, I don't like having health care. Yeah, I don't like getting beat up by cops. Yeah, I don't like seeing an old white guy crack his head open on the pavement by shoved down by a police officer. Yeah, I don't like seeing a white reporter getting shot in the eye by a rubber bullet and having her eye blown out and she's lost her sight in one eye. But you know what? I also don't like seeing a white cop put his knee on a black guy's neck and had the life taken from him. And again, we're going to have to start talking policy, because when George Floyd died, it was terrible, it was tragic, it was as inhumane of an act as I think society has seen maybe ever. But we also got to start asking real questions as to why a 46-year-old man needed to pass a counterfeit $20 bill, and why that 46-year-old man didn't have health care, and why that 46-year-old man didn't have a universal basic income. Because guess what? If he had a universal basic income and if he had health care, guess what? He wouldn't have needed to go to the corner store to get some food. Why? Because that homeboy could have said, you know what, let me do DoorDash, let me get some Uber Eats, and let me quarantine in my house. I don't have to worry about passing a fake $20 bill. I don't have to worry about passing a fake $20 bill. And again, so many people right now are just looking at these problems from a 10-foot view. We're looking at it from such a myopic perspective. We need to be looking at this from a 40, 50, or 60,000 foot perspective and really looking down on it and saying, you know what, shit, why exactly did George Floyd need to pass a fake $20 bill? Why did Eric Garner have to sell loose cigarettes on the street?
Yeah, exactly.
Why was Freddie Gray picked up on the street corner and minding his own business? Why? Because he was a convicted felon and he didn't have a job. Let's look into these real issues. But instead, we go ahead and criminalize behavior, and then we wonder why these situations happen in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree totally that we're not looking at these issues from a perspective that is holistic in any way until we're looking at it as like a broad systemic issue. And that's why we keep going back to like, we need to dismantle systemic oppression. We need to look at these 4 fights. Like, we all have and deserve, we all deserve to have freedom, equality, justice, and to be able to survive in this world. Like, we all, no matter where you're coming from, what marginalizes you, what doesn't marginalize you. Like, my question now is just, how do we keep those that are at the top involved, and how do we keep them, I guess me, I'm part of that. I'm a white person. How do I continuously engage in this intersectional outlook in order to push what we need to push? Because the message is out there now. Now, like you said, we need policy change. We need to act quickly and make these changes so that, you know, it's not for nothing.
Correct. I guess the biggest part is, first of all, communication. And again, this is why people protest, because we talked about this last week. A protest is a marketing plan for a grievance. So if nobody knows that you have a problem, no one in positions of power to actually affect the change are going to know what you're actually complaining about, or what your beef is, or what you're quote unquote griping about, or what are they complaining about again? Really, this whole Black Lives Matter shit? Why are they marching up and down the street? Wait a minute, why are all these gay and lesbian people marching up and down the street for, wearing rainbows, and what's this all about? What are they talking about? What do they want? And all these Latino people, wait a minute, they're talking about people, their brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, and the whole dreamer thing, and being put in cages. I don't know what this is about. The reason why you protest is to make sure that people in power who can affect change know what you want to have changed. Know what you want to have changed. And again, this is so why intersectionality is so important, Catherine, because again, there are certain groups that have their own stuff that they want to fight for individually. And I get that, because again, when the Supreme Court passed that ruling yesterday, there's a whole lot of transgender and gays and lesbians that were like, Mike, thank you, God. I can now get health care, and I don't have to worry about being oppressed again. I don't have to worry about being treated differently because I am different. Okay? But for every gay and LGBTQIA person that has to deal with a healthcare issue, there's a whole lot of Black and brown people that don't have healthcare. So again, that fight is different. So again, you have this sort of medical and this is just one example. You have this medical apartheid in Black and brown communities, especially with COVID-19, and then you now have the LGBTQ community that now is no longer going to be discriminated against as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. Therein is that intersectionality. Wait a minute, I'm no longer oppressed, but I understand what it's like to be oppressed because Trump took my rights away from me. Well, hey, look, I'm Black or I'm brown, and I get treated differently when I go to a caregiver, a hospital, short, long-term facility, whatever the case is. Let's come together and fight collectively. Let's come together and fight collectively. And again, people are going to have their differences in what they want. Latinx people are going to have their own issues regarding immigration because that's what's most important to them. Our brothers and sisters in the First Nations communities and the Native American communities, they're going to have issues that are specific to them because they affect their communities. But just because those issues affect their communities and I have issues that affect my community, and you as a white woman in Toronto, Canada, and I made sure I said Canada, not Chicago, Canada, you are going to have your own issues simply because you are a woman. There's going to be issues with regards to employment. Where it's like, hey, look, there might be a white guy that applies for a job and you're a white woman, and the white guy gets the job simply because he's a white guy.
Yeah.
So there's
gender pay gap. Still
gender
a real
pay
thing.
gap. It's a real thing. So again, these sorts of issues where there is some sort of commonality, and I forget who said this quote, but the quote goes something along the lines of, my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Mm-hmm.
My
Right.
enemy's enemy is my friend. And I think it was Gandhi who said that. I could be wrong. I probably am.
I
But
don't know.
it's that sort of understanding was, well, hey, look, you know what? We used to have a beef. We used to not really like each other because we were so stuck on ideology that ideology clouded the actual issues that we should have been fighting for, not only individually as a social group, but collectively as a society. And we forget about these things. But then when we look at each other, we actually have conversations like this and others, we understand, you know what, shit, there's a whole lot more similarities than there are differences. And you know what, we really should be working hand in hand together. So the first part is communication. Second part, legislation. We find people who are willing to represent our interests and not the interest of the 1%. There's a line from the movie The Wrath of Khan where where Spock is inside this plastic casing, and he can't get out, and he's going to die because the air is being sucked out of this tube, and and Captain Kirk's on the outside. He has his hands up against the plastic, and he says to him, Spock says to Captain Kirk, logic dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. You can look that clip up on YouTube. You'll see it there. That is the very definition of what public service and public servants are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be saying, hey, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But what we have in our governments right now in Canada, in the United States, and a lot of other countries is a complete flip of that pyramid. What we have are the needs of the few that are being outweighed by the needs of the many. So what we need are representatives, because again, we are in a representative government. What we need are representatives who represent the needs of the many and not the needs of the few, which is why one of the policies that I keep talking about is getting rid of money in politics. Because if you get rid of money
Absolutely.
in politics, you don't have this legalized. Look at it this way: if somebody gives me a bunch of money and it's not in a political situation, and that influences my choices down the road, that is bribery, and I go to jail. But because it's in a political situation, oh, it's lobbying. It's the same shit.
Yeah.
It's the same shit. So
Yeah.
get rid of legalized bribery, otherwise known as lobbying. Get rid of that. Also,
Totally.
and again, if we want to make sure that our representatives actually have policies and positions that they are advocating for rather than political ideologies that they're advocating for, then get rid of the winner take all system of political elections that we have right now. Get rid of, hey, one party, the two party system in the United States, or really the five parties that you have in Canada, but it's really more like four. You have Green, NDP, Conservatives, and
Liberal.
Liberals.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have those four. So get rid of that, and you go to a ranked choice voting system, otherwise known as the Condorcet system of voting. It was named for a French mathematician, where you rank your candidates based on order of preference. At that point, the political candidates will now have to actually work for your vote rather than be a member of a political party that's tied to ideologies that don't represent the mass of the people. Because again, if you go ahead and again, it also makes the political candidates work for the votes for not only their supporters, but they also have to reach out for the other people that may not necessarily support them right away, but they might be their second or third choice. Because again, it's about building a coalition across the body politic, which again goes back to intersectionality again, because it's not as easy as just making sure that you fight for the people that you know are going to be voting for you. You also have to make sure that you fight for the people that you might not be their first or second choice, but in lieu of them not getting their person, they still have to feel that their rights and their causes and their needs are going to be fought for, and you are going to represent their needs too, in addition to the people that chose you first.
Absolutely. That's amazing. You're on fire today, Joe. My goodness. That was overwhelmingly great. Yeah. And there's a Star Trek reference and a Bourdieu
We're
reference.
covering everything.
Man.
We're making sure. Look, just like Spock said when he said "live long and prosper," that's what we're trying to do. We're trying
Yeah.
to live long and prosper. And right now, to use another Star Trek reference because I'm feeling it today, we're looking to go boldly where no man has gone before with regards to
Yes.
overturning what we have as this sort of imperialist capitalist system. And I don't mean man in a gender specific sense. I mean human. And again, one of the fights we are talking about is this fight for humanity. And again, this fight for humanity is always going to be an ever going, ongoing fight. We have to keep fighting for it. We have to keep fighting for it. And it's a fight that maybe I might not see to win, but my 9-year-old daughter in North Carolina will may eventually get it. Or if you have kids, your kids might get to see that fight come to fruition, and they get to hold up their championship belt and say, "Hey, you know what? We won this fight.
Yeah.
We won this fight."
Yeah, and I think that that's the reality that we're in right now. Is we have to choose to redo an entire system into something we've never seen before. And I think
Exactly.
that's the key to all of this is like,
Yep.
like so many people are like, well, we've never, like, what do you mean you hate capitalism? I'm like, well, there's a lot to hate about it. So
There's
like,
a lot
why
to hate
can't
about
we,
it.
yeah, so why can't we just build a new system? And
Correct. Correct.
often I'll hear like, well, none of the other ones that we've tried worked. Well, why do we have to go back to those? We don't need
Exactly.
that anymore. We need
Exactly.
policies and government systems and,
Hmm.
you know, institutions. We have to rebuild institutions so that
Yes.
there's equity and there's protection for the most marginalized. And this
And the
is
most vulnerable.
not, and the most vulnerable, exactly. And
Hmm.
like the thing that always kind of gets me is like this sort of universalist ideology is like amazing, and I'm totally a peace and love and understanding person, but
Hmm.
it misses that there are still inequalities that we have to address, like
Correct.
reparations.
I agree.
Like we need to understand that it's not just, oh, we're all human, let's just all get along. Like, no, there's real life implications to all of this. And
I
that's why
agree.
we're calling for a redo of systemic institutional everything. Like
Yep.
we need to be on this path. And like you say, it might not happen in our lifetimes, but
No.
dang, it'll be worth it if we can make some moves. We just
Yes, absolutely.
we need people to stop dying at the hands of these fucked up institutions and the human
I agree.
beings that are killing black people.
I agree. And it's not just the institutions that are killing black people. There are plenty of institutions that unfortunately kill white people also. Take a look at healthcare. Take a look at the inequalities with regards to healthcare from between white women and white men.
Mm-hmm.
Take a look at that. Take a look at poor white people in middle America that don't have health care. There are plenty of institutions that are killing white people too. And again, this crisis that we're in right now is existential, and it is, in addition to it being existential, it is intersectional. It is
Absolutely.
intersectional because again, there's a whole lot of people that are dying, and COVID-19 doesn't discriminate.
No.
COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. COVID-19 will kill the 11-year-old white girl, and it will kill the 78-year-old black woman just as easily.
Yeah.
It kills either way. And you mentioned the word capitalism. The root word of capitalism, it would be easy to say, oh, capitalize, which, yeah, this makes sense. But I think the root word of the word capitalism is cap. Cap.
Mm.
And from a musical term, there's a term in I think it's either in Italian or Latin where it says del capo, where if you see those words above the staff, it means you start from the beginning, or you
Mm.
start at the top, or you start at the head. Like when you're wearing something on your head, I know Canadians call it a toque, but we Americans call this a cap. So it comes from your head. So the idea is, hey, capitalism, you use your head to make money. And that's one way of looking at it. But I think the other and obvious way to look at it is, yeah, capitalism, yes, it does involve some sort of using your head to make money, but it also means that there's always going to be some inequality because whenever somebody wins, by default in a zero-sum game of the economic system that we are in right now, by default there must be a loser.
Yeah.
There must be a loser. And we are in a crisis right now, economically, socially, politically, health-wise, you name it, where we've had losers for far too long, and the constant stream of losers and losing is exactly why there's so much debt in this society, and not just a financial debt, but a moral debt that must be paid, and that moral debt can't be paid just with money. It has to be paid with recalibrating how we live our lives, not just from a day-to-day existence from an income perspective, but how we treat each other as human beings. Mm-hmm. That's how we have to recalibrate our lives. We have to look at it from that perspective. Because if we don't look at it from that perspective, we will continue to lose. And these fights that we are in right now, they're too expensive. We can't afford to lose these fights. And there's no amount of reparations that's going to be able to balance out that checkbook so we can afford to keep losing these fights.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think it even goes further because, like, once we address some of this stuff for human beings, it'll extend to the environment and climate change.
I agree.
And
I agree.
It's, capitalism is based on exploitation of humans and resources. So, like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So dismantling that, because it is a tool of systemic oppression. That's like the tool that has been used, and we just accept it as it is.
Yep.
Yeah. So if we're challenging that, like we're inherently challenging the exploitation of everything in the world.
Exactly.
That we've been relying on since the
Forever.
Industrial Revolution.
Yes. In now the nonprofit side of my brain is going to start talking again. Now, in nonprofits, there is a common phrase called the double bottom line, and then there's the triple bottom line. So we're going to talk about sort of the accounting principles and ethoses that kind of go with this and how it applies to what we're talking about now. So when you talk about the bottom line, the first bottom line is, hey, you made money. It made good financial sense to do what you were supposed to be doing. The double bottom line is when it makes good financial sense and there is a social benefit that comes. The triple bottom line is when it makes financial sense, you have a social benefit that comes from whatever you're doing, and it is good for the environment. So when you start talking about institutions, and what I said a few minutes ago about, hey, we keep losing these fights and we can't afford to keep losing them. Again, when you start talking about institutions might need to start thinking about how they go about their day-to-day operations. And yeah, you know what? Corporate welfare kind of does need to go. So, you know what? If you're in a business and you consistently lose money and you get subsidized by the government because it's good for you and you keep losing money, then you need to be out of business. Go away and don't come back. But if you're a business that does make money and you do it the right way, and there's a social benefit that comes from it, and it's environmentally friendly, so for example, one of the things I think that should absolutely be abolished is factory farming.
Yes.
Stop it.
Absolutely.
Stop it.
And monocultures. Massive agriculture. Yeah.
Exactly. Stop with this factory farming, because again, many of these factory farms actually don't really make money. They get a ton of government subsidies, and then they're not doing anything to benefit society at all. Other than, and again, I'm vegan, so again, my views might be a little bit skewed, but I think it's totally wrong to kill an animal for a food source. But that's just my personal beliefs coming into this. But then, if you think about the way that for example, chicken farms, how they spray chicken feed and all the pesticides, and it gets into water, and the manure that comes from these chicken farms is actually spread as fertilizer. And some of the manure lands on people's homes nearby and causes respiratory issues and skin problems. And it seeps into the water table and contaminates their water. Again, if we're going to pull the curtain back on just systemic oppression, and we're going to pull this curtain back and tie the shoelaces of intersectionality when we march up and down the street in our boots that we're going to be wearing, we need to pull back the curtain on everything.
Yeah.
And fix everything. Because then if we're going to fight, we might as well fight for everything. And again, factory farms are another thing we need to be fighting against, because it's terrible. It's terrible.
Truly. Yeah, truly. It's also like the runoff you mentioned also like not only contributes to people getting really, really sick in those areas, but it's also historically Black neighborhoods that are in those toxic areas. And then
it's environmental racism.
Yeah, environmental racism, exactly. And then those people are the ones that are getting sick, perpetuating the healthcare, all the stuff you mentioned earlier about healthcare and the disparities in there. And then that runoff still has to go somewhere. It's going into the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico and literally killing everything.
Exactly.
So this is all, you're so right. It's an all-encompassing thing. And I don't want that to be scary for people, but we need to change the world. And I think we have a unique opportunity right now because of the global pandemic. And yes, it's awful and horrible, and all of us have been suffering in one way or another, but it offers a step back for us to be oh, we are actually a global community. We can address these issues and stop exploiting brown people across the ocean, and stop exploiting brown people in our own fucking country.
I agree.
And stop putting them in jails, and stop systemically, making them sick with your bullshit industries, etc., etc. It's time. It's time.
It's time. My uncle told me this years ago, and again, I've been vegan for over 10 years, and I haven't had an egg in probably 20 to 25 years. But he said this to me, Uncle Ansel, God rest his soul. He told me this. He said, Joe, if you want an omelet, sometimes you have to break a few eggs. He said, if you want an omelet, sometimes you have to break a few eggs. And when you're 10 years old, I didn't understand what that phrase meant. But I get it now, because if we want that omelet, we have to go through the process of breaking some eggs. And in some instances, breaking those eggs will be having uncomfortable conversations with people that we never had conversations with before. Sometimes breaking those eggs are going to be doing the difficult work legislatively of rewriting the Constitution. Sometimes breaking those eggs is potentially getting arrested during a protest. Sometimes breaking those eggs might mean getting injured in a protest or worse. Sometimes breaking those eggs is a white person standing in front of a black person, and a white person weaponizing their white privilege to make sure that black person doesn't get shot and or killed by a police officer.
Yeah.
Sometimes breaking those eggs is a police officer going against the blue wall of silence and standing up and saying, you know what? Get your knee off of that man's neck. That's fucked up. Don't do this. Sometimes that also is breaking the eggs. Not that I want an omelet, because I don't eat eggs anyway, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
Yeah, because I think eggs are nasty, but that's a whole other conversation.
No, I appreciate that analogy, though, because we only have 5 minutes left, but it kind of brings it all back to sort of how this all started. We started because of the movement. And I think that challenging white supremacy as a white person with all the other white people in my life, I mean, I can't say it enough. It sucks to have these conversations and to look at that stuff in yourself.
I agree.
But man, everybody listening, it is worth it. look at this beautiful human I get to have a conversation with. Like, man, right?
Hey, you know.
Yeah, and like, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
it's hard. It's gonna be more and more difficult the more we realize how attached we are to the systems and the institutions that exist. And I mean, I think that's part of why there's so much resistance right now. We may not see it in our circles, but there is
Right.
resistance, and but that's okay because every time there's large social change, there's always a backlash first. But like we got to be on the winning side. We have
Exactly.
to, because
Exactly.
people are waking up,
People are
and we're
waking up.
challenging ourselves, and like yeah, fuck
I mean, so,
capitalism, fuck
you know,
institutionalized
you
oppression.
know, all of it. Sir Isaac Newton once said in his first three laws of physics that every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
So for every bit of resistance that we will encounter, there's going to be an equal and opposite force of love that is going to take over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I mean, and again, for every irresistible force, there's an immovable object.
Mm-hmm.
And the immovable object that we represent is the fight for justice, the fight for freedom, the fight for humanity, equality, and survival. We are that immovable object, and there's no amount of police officers with riot gear that's going to be able to move us.
No, no, you're totally right. Yeah, yeah. This is it,
So
Joe. This is it. We have to
I'm
be we have
yeah,
to be doing this work. I'm so inspired by you, and thank you so much
you're very
for
welcome.
agreeing to do this with me every week. It's been
Hey, you know what? There's a lot going on um, with all of us, um, and yeah, I mean, it's important, and this matters. You matter. We all matter, and every one of us watching matters. And
yeah.
the sooner we understand that we all are human beings, that we all are complex, complicated individuals that have our own paths in life,
Our
that
own
have our own
intersections
journeys in
of
life.
identity and existence.
Correct. And that's exactly what intersectionality is. It's,
Mm-hmm.
hey, look, two streets meet and they meet in the middle. And just as if we're at an intersection where two streets come together and they meet at the middle, it's that sort of meeting in the middle that black people and white people are eventually going to have to come to doing. We'll have to all meet in the middle so there's a common ground. And that intersectionality is what we eventually all need to understand and eventually all need to keep working towards and to keep in the forefront of our minds, the forefront of in our bodies, and most importantly in the forefronts of our spirits.
Absolutely. I couldn't have ever said it better. My goodness. We've only got a minute left, so
I
I
know.
guess we'll leave it there.
Next week, what are we talking next week, Catherine? What are we talking
Oh,
about next week?
next week, oh my goodness, we're going to talk about a theory, maybe a couple theories. We're going to apply
Yes.
that to a real life situation that happens
Yes,
all the
ma'am.
time. The Karens
Absolutely.
weaponizing whiteness, white
Yep.
fragility, all that
Yep.
garbage.
All that
We're
stuff.
going to tackle it.
We're going to tackle it. We're going to put it in a headlock,
Yeah.
and we're going to figure out how to dismantle Karens.
Yeah.
We're going to
Let's
figure out
get
how to dismantle Karens. Yes, ma'am. We're going to get it. We're going to go all the way in with this.
it. Yes.
Thanks to everybody that watched this.
Yes, thank you.
Catherine, mwah, you're the best. Love you forever.
Love you
And
too.
yes, my dear. And please give Onus a pet. Rub his
Will.
belly rub
I
for me, okay?
will.
Just right,
For
right.
sure.
Yeah.
I
All right.
shall. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. All
Mwah,
right.
you're the
Take
best.
care of
Take care.
yourself.
Word up. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.